growing up is an inevitable part of life that sneaks up on some and is yearned by others. But it's also a trap. Cooly follows Naota's exploits as a 12-year-old boy figuring out what it means to grow up. Sure, robots sprout out of his head and he unwittingly gets thrown in the middle of a plot to rescue one of the universe's most powerful entities from medical mechanica. But at its core, Cooly tackles what it means to truly grow up, and why the pursuit of growing up is the most goo gaga baby thing one can do. Hello Funkers, Tony Funk here. Today we're going to analyze Cooly's most important lesson about coming of age, and in doing so, explain the enigmatic roles of Mamimi Samejima and Eri Ninamori, and dissect why these characters are central to the story at heart. But before I get into the nitty-gritty of why these two characters weren't shoehorned into a story about intergalactic portals and robots, I must talk about Naota and his childish desire to seem mature. From the first episode, we get to see Naota's vapid desire to seem cool by stating to Mamimi that the reason he does not do his homework at school is because it's uncool to do so. We then get to hear him state that nothing interesting happens in his hometown of Mabase, something which he utters throughout the series, usually preceded by ungodly amounts of quackery. This fake nonchalant attitude and this admission about wanting to be perceived as cool immediately tells us about Naota's performative nature. Naota initially has no personality of his own, focusing on emulating cool or adult behavior instead of engaging in activities that he actually likes doing. This type of maturity emulating behavior stems from the fact that his older brother, to Naota's eyes at least, outgrew the town of Mabase when he was scouted to play baseball in the United States. Naota then probably feels abandonment subconsciously from his brother Tasuku. If we look at his family dynamics, Naota's father is a widower and seems to be a source of embarrassment for Naota. Because of this, we can assume that Tasuku served as a role model of masculine behavior and coolness for Naota. According to researchers from Purdue University and Penn State, in an article titled Theoretical Perspectives on Sibling Relationships, and I quote, "Siblings' behaviors toward each other may exert an influence on the sibling relationship, with each sibling's working model influencing the creation of an attachment relationship between them. This means that depending on the type of relationship between siblings, the younger sibling forms an attachment akin to a parent-child attachment with their eldest sibling." The article then adds, "In addition to their primary caregiver, children can form attachments to a range of familiar others in their social worlds, and given their ubiquity in everyday life during childhood and adolescence, siblings are prime candidates for attachment relationships." This explains why Naota clings to vestiges left behind Tasuku as a form of comfort. Typically in parental relationships after the age of 2, children start to explore the world on their own, but return to their parents whenever they experience distress as a source of security. Therefore, based on the following quote, "Attachment is not equivalent to relationship positivity, but implies a deeper bond that varies in the extent to which a relationship partner serves as a source of emotional security." Therefore, Tasuku was Naota's social form of emotional security while he still lived in Mabase. Naota carrying Tasuku's bat and hanging out with Mamimi, despite her being a dummy, are ways in which Naota can cope with his emotional caregiver's absence. By extension, Naota wants to become his brother by acting cool and attempting to appear more mature than he is, considering that children with truncated interactions with their caregivers tend to mature more quickly by emulating the behavior of their estranged caregivers. This is why Naota's relationship with Mamimi is so important, because Mamimi calling Naota Takun and treating him like Takun is an on-the-nose indication that Naota's concept of growing up is literally becoming Tasuku. But we will later explore the idea that Naota's behavior is quite common and an example of immaturity. But first, let's talk about Mamimi. Mamimi is the first character introduced in Cooly, as we hear her describe proper batting technique while Naota studies. What's interesting is that despite Mamimi being introduced as a consequential element to the plot of Cooly, her usage is limited to being an observer of Naota's story until the last episode where she acts as a catalyst for Atomsk's introduction. What this means though is that Cooly is effectively telling two different stories. The first story is the crazy plot concerning the mystery behind medical mechanica, Atomsk, and Haruko's intentions. This plot is so wacky and unpredictable that it feels like it exists solely as a means to entertain the audience. However, I would argue that it is simply the medium in which the secondary story can exist. The secondary story then revolves around Naota's baggage of having the rug pulled from underneath him by Tasuku when he leaves. Naota's baggage manifests in the form of his conflict between being like Tasuku and by extension becoming an adult, versus becoming his own person and embracing maturity by accepting the responsibilities of his age. In this secondary story, Mamimi is the main antagonist and the last vestige of Tasuku that Naota has to overcome. Mamimi's interactions with Naota indicate that she is using Naota as a surrogate for Tasuku by getting all lovey-dovey with him. This essentially traps Naota in arrested development with him trying to live up to Tasuku by replacing him as Mamimi's boyfriend. But things aren't so simple either. Naota is usually seen protesting Mamimi's advances due to him battling with his sense of self. Yet, we always see Naota hanging out with Mamimi to the point that his friends call her his wife, indicating Naota's lack of self-awareness that others know he likes Mamimi because of his insistence to hang out with her despite the inappropriate age gap. This lack of self-awareness keeps Naota tentatively playing with the idea that he doesn't like Mamimi, yet participating in behaviors that indicate the opposite. Before I get into Eri Ninamori and explain how she represents true maturity, I must talk about Haruko. Haruko's usage as a catalyst for Naota's further confusion is obvious, as she becomes a wrench in Naota's thought process about what an adult is supposed to look like. Haruko's violent and erratic antics initially put Naota off, and keep him believing that in order to get over his brother's absence, he must become like his brother. Eventually, though, Naota develops a type of Stockholm syndrome and falls in love with Haruko. What makes Haruko important in Naota's development is that she becomes an object of jealousy and thus diverts Naota's attention from wanting to become like his brother into wanting to become like his father. Throughout the series, we see Naota display visible discomfort whenever he sees his widower father getting frisky with Haruko. Though initially, we had never seen Naota demonstrate respect for his father, seeing his naughty interactions with Haruko caused them to look up to him as an example of masculinity, at least when it comes to man-woman relationships. Though this isn't spelled out, Naota's jealousy of his father indicates castration anxiety. Castration anxiety is a concept coined by Sigmund Freud that indicates a stage in psychosexual development. Essentially, male children feel emasculated by their fathers when they discover the nature of their relationships with their mothers or other women. In essence, male children start to view their lives as intrinsically being in competition with their fathers for female attention. This is exemplified in the 5th episode when Naota and Kamon duel for Haruko's attention. Based on this, we can see how Haruko in a vacuum couldn't challenge Naota's obsession with his brother, and by extension his relationship with Mamimi, but Haruko's relationship with Kamon could. Therefore, Haruko elicited a desire for Naota to emulate his father as a symbol of adulthood, and as such, weakened his attachments to Tasuku. Haruko's role then represents the death of Tasuku in Naota's eyes. His affection in the 5th episode switches completely from Mamimi to Haruko, and he decides to abandon school to adventure with her. Symbolically, in the same way Naota replaced Mamimi for Haruko, he also replaces Tasuku's bat for a Gibson Flying V in the 4th episode as a sign that Tasuku's relevance as an adult role model was on the verge of being replaced. But now that we've beaten to death the idea that Naota was using role models as a way to emulate maturity in adulthood, what does Fooly Cooly even say about maturity? Well, now let's take a look at Eri Ninamori. Eri, for the largest part of the series, acts as a reflection of Naota, with her demeanor predominantly being one of appearing more mature than she really was. Her family life is somewhat similar to that of Naota's in the sense that she doesn't embrace her relationship with her family initially. Early on in the 3rd episode, we learn that Eri's father had an affair and caused her parents to separate, something which became news in the town of Mabase due to her father being the mayor. One of the reasons Eri is so similar to Naota is because of her propensity to carry a front. She often acts significantly more nonchalant and composed than her classmates, and even hides the fact that she needs reading glasses. This front of hers, where she wants to be seen as a different person, is no different than Naota's aspirations to be acknowledged as an adult. I believe that an additional level of similarity to Naota was added to her character as a means to link them as the same character type up until the end of the series. This similarity stems from her NO capabilities when she sprouts a giant robot out of her head. Her capabilities are also shown to be comparable to Naota's, which is remarkable considering that it was stated that NO powers were rare, and even when found, they would rarely be capable of transporting entire robots, as seen with Commander Amurao. If then, Eri and Naota are meant to represent the same kind of character, why is Eri instrumental in demonstrating true maturity? Well, admittedly, Eri starts off super immature, hiding her true self, rigging the class play, and staying away from her parents. What Eri eventually develops in the 6th episode, though, is acceptance. Though Naota is seen living as a reflection of somebody else, or a representation of what he believes adults should be, Eri eventually shows acceptance of her situation by crying in front of her parents, and telling them about how she felt. This admission to her friends is then immediately punctuated by Eri after performing an impressive high jump, as if to represent Eri's freedom from having to pretend to be someone she's not. You see, Eri transcends her need to appear mature by accepting her reality as a 12-year-old, and dealing with her issues within the parameters of her age. Eri can't indefinitely escape home life, and she can't escape her classmates, so for her, the most mature thing to do is to be vulnerable and be a kid. In the final episode, Naota shoots a shot with Haruko, kissing her and declaring his love as Atomsk escapes into the vastness of the universe. Though Haruko should definitely be going to jail, she doesn't, and considers taking Naota along for her search of Atomsk before quickly retracting her offer and saying, "You know what, forget it, cause you're still a kid, Takun. Save it for next time," and leaving the planet never to be seen again by Naota. What's interesting, Haruko never called Naota by his name, always using Mamimi's nickname for Tasuku, as if to add insult to injury. And yet, Naota replaced Mamimi's hold on his development with Haruko's, symbolized by the bass guitar he kept. Naota's story in the Fooly Cooly franchise ends here, but that doesn't mean we don't know how his arrested development affects him later in life. As it happens, Eri isn't the only Naota counterpart in the story, and we do get to see what happens to Naota in his adulthood, albeit through a different character. Commander Amurao is Naota specifically when he grows up, not literally, but in spirit. He also met Haruko as a child and was used as an NO channel and seemingly never got over her. His arrested development is evidenced by being a grown-ass man who uses seaweed as fake eyebrows in an attempt to appear more manly or mature than he actually is. It's also interesting that just like Naota, Commander Amurao hates spicy, sour, and pulpy foods, adding more credence that his character represents Naota's future. And well, even though Amurao never got a guitar as a symbol of his lingering feelings for Haruko, he rides a Vespa just like she does. I guess Fooly Cooly really wanted us to understand that in order to grow up, one must be a kid first, or risk being a kid forever. It's fitting that in the end, Naota didn't learn anything about growing up while ironically trying to grow up, which is why it's poetic that Eri's last words to Naota are, "You really are still a kid." Ultimately, this is why wanting to grow up is a foolish endeavor. Trying to emulate the responsibilities of adults when one isn't is irresponsible and consequently immature. People who grow up quickly for some kind of recognition often find themselves in miserable situations. For example, those who attempt to raise kids, get married, buy a home, or commit to a career before they're ready are not perceived as mature nor as adults, but as shameful pantomimes of what they're trying to emulate by real adults. And what we can see by contrasting Eri and Naota is that growing up happens in steps, with maturity being dictated by how well we deal with the responsibilities of our age. And don't get me wrong, folks, there's nothing wrong with wanting more responsibilities. Kids are great for some, mortgages are awesome, a career in proctology pays well, but before you pull the trigger because of some societal pressure, think if you're doing it to feel like an adult, or if you're actually doing it because it's the next obvious step for your happiness. So, Funkers, enjoy life as it comes, embrace baby steps, and whatever you do, don't grow up.